Now let's talk about the cells that make up the nervous system. So we've talked about cells before. The entire body is made of cells. For example, there are skin cells, there are kidney cells, there are liver cells, there are muscle cells. In the brain and the spinal cord, there's a special kind of cell that is called a neuron. You can also call it a nerve cell, but it is called a neuron. So if we take a look at a neuron, it looks something like this. So a neuron, notice, has all these, long attachments coming off of it. So there's two main kinds of attachments. One is called a dendrite, which is basically kind of a wire-like thing that receives information. So all of these wire-like things over here that are relatively short, they receive information and bring it into the cell. The cell processes it and then sends a signal down the axon, which kind of looks like a big long wire, through an electrical signal somewhere else. So this neuron over here receives information through these dendrites. It figures out what to do, and it sends a signal down this axon to the next neuron, or wherever it is supposed to go. So the nervous system is very complex. The previous picture just showed you one neuron. But if we were to examine the brain, we would see that there are millions and billions and probably trillions of cells that make up the brain. And all of these are organized into these three-dimensional structure. So for example, right over here is one neuron. And you can see that it's connected to some of these other neurons. It's connected to all of these other neurons all over the place. There are signals that it receives from some of these neurons, and then it processes it and then sends the signal on to another neuron. So all of these neurons are communicating with each other. They're all sending signals back and forth to each other. All of these signals help you to think. They help you to sense the surroundings. They enable you to see, to hear, to taste. The nervous system has two main kinds of neurons. The peripheral nervous system has two main kinds of neurons. So remember, the peripheral nervous system is outside of the brain and the spinal cord. So over here on the right, remember, we have the brain and then we have the spinal cord. Now the spinal cord, has lots of nerves that come off of it. And those nerves, they go all over the body. Some of them go to the heart. Some of them go to the digestive system. Some of them go to the skin. Some go to the muscles. So the peripheral nervous system has two main kinds of neurons. One kind of neuron is called a sensory neuron. So what does a sensory neuron do? It basically brings in information from the outside into the spinal cord and brain. So for example, let's suppose you take your hand and you place it on a hot stove. Sensory neurons are going to send information about the temperature of the hot stove to the brain. So the sensory neuron is bringing information from the outside, that is from your hand, all the way inside into your brain. That is called a sensory neuron. That's bringing information in. Now the brain has to decide what to do. So the brain decides, we need to take this hand away from the hot stove. So what does it do? The brain now has to send a signal back outside to the muscles of the arm and the hand to quickly take your hand away from the stove. So how does it do that? Well, it sends out a signal through what is called a motor neuron. So a sensory neuron is bringing information into your brain. When the brain tells the body to do something, it sends that information out to that part of the body through a motor neuron. So sensory neurons are bringing information into the brain. Information being sent out from the brain is called a motor neuron.